From Software is one of the most influential gaming studios ever. Ever since they released Demon's Souls, they've only been dropping great video games, with some titles being some of the most influential in gaming, like Dark Souls 1 and Elden Ring. But today's video isn't about From Software, it's about another game studio that was able to take From Software's Souls formula and perfect it, unlike any other game studio that tried to take on the Soulslike subgenre. I'm of course talking about Round8 Studios, the creators of Lies of P. I've never seen a Souls game of this quality that wasn't made by From Software. Round8 Studios created a work of art with Lies of P, taking everything that was amazing about From Software's titles and combining it into a complete game that wasn't just trying to be difficult for the sake of being difficult. But before we talk about Lies of P, we need to talk about the main studio behind this game, and that is of course Round8 Studios. Because Round8 Studios isn't some big AAA established studio, but rather a slightly larger indie team of around 100 people. Now, the studio was created after the disastrous life of Bless Online. If you don't know what Bless Online is, or you have no idea what I'm talking about, let me explain it to you. Bless Online is a Korean MMORPG that was hyped up to be the next big MMO. However, of course it wasn't. In fact, the game was absolute dog shit. Some of the reasons for this was its horrible performance, constant crashing, dog shit combat, and the worst thing of all, it was extremely boring. And not only that, it was built in Unreal Engine 3, and the game was basically in early access for most of its lifetime, and then they released it in 2018 on the same Unreal Engine 3. And basically nobody played it because everybody knew how bad this game actually was. And NeoWiz, the publisher of this game, was in a lot of trouble. After this catastrophe of a game, NeoWiz had to fix this somehow. And they tried doing this by giving the game a complete overhaul, and this led to the creation of Round8 Studios. It was an internal dev team of NeoWiz, and Round8 rebuilt Blessed Online from scratch in a modern engine, and I'm of course talking about Unreal Engine 4. And it was made specifically as a console MMORPG. Round8 Studios actually tried to listen to the feedback of the players who played Bless Online, and they did everything in their power to fix this game's combat and everything that was complete dog shit in Bless Online. So the devs went through sleepless nights just trying to make this game slightly successful. And what happened after all the development? Did Round8 Studios manage to create an MMO everyone wanted? Well, no. Don't get me wrong, the game was way better than Bless Online. However, that game is like a 1 out of 10 and Bless Unleashed was like a 6 out of 10. The truth was, even though the game wasn't bad, in fact I'd say the game was quite decent actually, because of its combat, there were just still so many better options for an MMORPG. The game simply wasn't unique and people simply weren't interested. Why would anyone decide to play Bless Unleashed over any other big MMO title like Final Fantasy XIV? However, even though the game wasn't even that successful, in 2019, Round8 Studios and NeoWiz set their sights on a new project, and they want to create a game that wouldn't just be popular in the local Korean video game market that was overrun by online mobile games, but rather a game that would be popular globally and aimed to be made specifically for PC and consoles. So Round8 Studios, with the help of NeoWiz, started to develop a brand new game in Unreal Engine 4. And with Round8's previous experience in this engine, it was just a recipe for success. And in 2021, 2 years after the pitched idea, we finally got our first look at the game, Lies of P. From the game's first trailer, it just looked completely unique, and it was just so eye-catching because of its unique and disturbing atmosphere. And the thing that was even more eye-catching was how the story was made. It was a reimagined fairy tale. This game took the story of Pinocchio and made it much darker and gave it a melancholic vibe. And the setting of the game was absolutely beautiful from the start. Many people compared it to Bloodborne, but that wasn't the case. The devs didn't try to do that. The setting was inspired by 19th century Paris, mixed up with the steampunk style. However, even though the devs say that they didn't take inspiration from the Victorian setting of Bloodborne to create this world, they definitely did take an inspiration from Software when they were designing the gameplay, because Lies of P was designed as a Souls-like from the get-go. Except the devs had planned the game to have a different approach to storytelling from other Souls games, giving the players the ability to either lie or tell the truth, and depending on your answers throughout the entirety of the game, you would get different endings. I mean, just by the way Round 8 was describing this game, you could have seen this was a passion project. Troy G. Wan, I hope I said that name right, said that developing this game was basically raising a baby. They slowly watched it grow and become bigger and more complex over time. And when the director of Lies of P was asked about the competition of the Souls-like subgenre, the director basically said he doesn't care about the competition that much, because he's confident in his team that the game will stand out from all of the other Souls-likes. And after 3 years of development, a few months before launch, NeoWiz decided to release a demo for the game. And the question now was the game any good? And let me just say, anybody who played the demo of Lies of P when it came out just absolutely knew this game was special. Not only was the combat some of the smoothest I've ever seen in a Souls game, but Round 8 Studios was so confident in the game that they decided to give us one of the longest Souls demos that let us completely explore the first area in the game, interact with NPCs, and the best of all, they gave us 3 complete boss fights that we can try out for completely free. And then 3 months after the demo released, we finally got a chance to play Lies of P. And oh boy, the game did not disappoint. Let's start with the gameplay. It was completely original and didn't just basically copy from Software, but it did definitely take inspiration from them. The first thing that Round 8 Studios did right was the combat of Lies of P. It was fluid, it was unique, and it was more fun than any other Souls-like. The game gave you multiple ways of dealing with different encounters. You could dodge, parry, or just simply run away from an enemy's attack. And you had the ability to mix all of these into creating your perfect style that completely suited you. The game also took inspiration from Bloodborne's rally system, except they only changed it up a bit, because you can only regain some of your health if you succeeded in blocking an attack, or I should say, failing a parry. I mean, just every single fight in this game felt like a beautiful dance of attacks and parries, and every missed parry was a chance to regain some of your health. Parrying attacks also let you stun the enemies and bosses easier, and when you are one heavy attack away from a chance to perform a critical strike, the boss's health bar will be outlined with a white color. When the boss is super stunned, you can chain multiple attacks and then perform a critical strike. And since I was just talking about the parrying in this game, I need to mention that the parry window in this game is actually really small. And when you want to parry, you really need to lock in and analyze the boss's animations. However, it's not impossible. Once you get good at it, every single boss will be easy to parry. And it just feels so satisfying when you finally get confident in your parries and you just parry everything you see in sight. Another thing I need to talk about these games are the weapons, because holy, not only do I think they are amazing, I just absolutely love them. You can mix a handle and a blade from 2 different weapon types and create your own special weapon. You can use a great sword with the rapier's handle and just basically obliterate people with it. And another thing about weapons is that every single weapon in this game has fable arts. They are basically weapon arts, except they are revolutionized. Since they do much more damage, they are much more useful, and instead of using mana as a condition to activate these fable arts, the game uses fable charges, which you can recharge by attacking the enemy and being aggressive. However, once your fable charges are full and you can finally hit that fabled attack, it will just feel so satisfying, especially because some of these fable arts are just super overpowered. And another thing this game did right was the durability and stamina management. The durability of weapons is something that was super unique in this game, because you basically need to sharpen your weapons throughout the fight, because your weapons break really easily, and this made you constantly check for the durability of your weapon, and you actually need to manage it, when to hit and when to parry, and also find time when to sharpen your blade. And the stamina management in this game was also much less forgiving than in any other Souls game. Your stamina is basically really small. Like, if you aren't careful with your stamina in this game, you will die. Another great thing in this game are the pulse cells. These are basically your Estus, except once you are out of them, you can again be aggressive and recharge them by attacking. When you're out of healing, it isn't over, and if you really, let's say, lock in to just beat a boss, it doesn't matter how many pulse cells you got left, because if you're confident in yourself that you can parry every attack and keep attacking, you have infinite healing. And since I've mentioned the bosses a couple of times in this combat talk, I need to just talk about them briefly, because Round8 Studios truly tried to make a boss roster of some of the most unique and creative bosses ever designed. I absolutely loved 95% of the bosses in this game. The only one I didn't really like was Fuoko, the King of Flame. And I just really didn't like that boss because of a few aspects. First of all, it didn't have that many attacks, and his design wasn't really that memorable, which is something I can't say about every other boss in this game, because the bosses are just so good. Like Archbishop Duke Andreas, Simon Manus, Laxaxia, Romeo, the King of Puppets, and of course, one of my favorites, which is going to be very controversial, but I'll say the Black Rabbit Brotherhood's Revenge. But overall, the biggest advantage Lies of P had over other Souls-likes is that the game doesn't feel like it's copying from Software's games at all. You feel like you're playing a brand new game made by From Software, with all of the polish and originality in the world. Even mechanics that have clearly taken inspiration from Sekiro, like the Legion arms, were made to be as original as possible. You couldn't just spam the ability, like Sekiro Firecrackers. You actually had to position yourself correctly to use the arm to its potential, like the Flame Barrel, the Electric Blitz, or the Acid Legion arm. Every part of this game felt like there was so much love put into it, and the combat is just a love letter to every single From Software title. Another thing that Round8 Studios taken really good care of in this game were the areas of Lies of P. Now, the world design of the game wasn't anything special, the game was quite linear, but it just worked so well because of its story structure. When you walk and go through the areas in this game, you feel like you are really visiting Krat for the first time in many years, and you can just see how the entire city got completely ruined and basically went to shit. Krat is very important to the lore of this game, and I'm so glad Round8 Studios gave us the opportunity to visit all of its areas with so much history behind them, and you can just see how much effort Round8 Studios put into just the design of this city and its landmarks. The cathedral, the opera house, the Grand Exhibition Gallery, the Lorenzini Arcade, and the Barren Swamp are all just phenomenal areas in art design. And another thing Round8 Studios did really well were the reimagined character designs of the characters from Pinocchio, like the Black Rabbit Brotherhood, Alidoro, Romeo, and Sophia, who is of course the fairy that helps Pinocchio through his entire journey. There are also other references, like the gold fruit coin tree, Wangini's submarine, which looked like the dogfish from the books, and also the entirety of Krat has a lot of similarities with the Land of Toys, because the petrification disease is basically just a reimagined donkey fever from the book. But what really is the petrification disease? Well, to understand that, we first need to talk about the amazing lore Round8 Studios created while creating this entire world and life system. The story starts like this. Krat was at one point one of the most technologically advanced cities in the world. It was a city built on top of caves that contained ergo crystals. But it wasn't until the alchemists showed up that the true potential of ergo was discovered, and it was used to evolve humanity. Soon ergo was used for everything. It was studied and it became an energy source in Krat. And the alchemists did everything to push humanity further with this new discovery. And one of the alchemists was able to do just that, because he used ergo to create puppets, which was revolutionary. And the alchemist that of course did this was none other than Giuseppe Geppetto. Once the puppet was discovered, they were basically used for everything. Puppets became servants who followed the Grand Covenant, a series of absolute orders that every single puppet had to follow. Order number 1, all puppets must obey their creator's commands. Order number 2, a puppet may not harm humans. Order number 3, a puppet protects and serves humans and the city of Krat. And finally, order number 4, a puppet cannot lie. And everything was perfect until the puppet frenzy happened. Puppets broke the flawed Grand Covenant, and thanks to ergo, they've gained an ego. They've gained a desire for humanity. Because ergo isn't just some simple energy source, it's a human's essence. And one of the first puppets to break the Grand Covenant was Arlecchino, a puppet created using the ergo of a serial killer. It wanted to prove that it's more human. Arlecchino was the first puppet to gain an ego, so he went on a killing spree, murdering every single human he found. He hated humans for trapping him. He knew that he was a human, except that he couldn't prove it. However, the puppet frenzy wasn't the only problem ergo caused. Ergo also caused the humans who survived the puppet frenzy to be infected by a disease that turns everyone into grotesque carcasses, and the name of this disease was the petrification disease. Ergo was used everywhere, and the worst part of it was that it was getting worse over time. So because of its large consumption, everybody in the city got either killed by puppets or turned into a monster. But where do we come into this entire story? Well, we are woken up by a butterfly in a subway. We play as P, a puppet who is so similar to a human, no one can tell the difference. And one of the biggest aspects of our main character is that we don't follow the Grand Covenant. After we walk through the subway, we enter the Hotel of Krat. And here we meet Sophia. Sophia is basically our fairy. She helps us explore this ruined city of Krat so we can find out what truly caused all of these events. Alongside Sophia, in the hotel, we find Antonia, Eugene, Polandina, and then later in the game, the hotel gets more and more visitors, with Alidoro, who we find at the Saint Frangelico Cathedral, Vangini, who we find in the Vangini Works control room alongside his butler, and finally Geppetto, who we find in Krat after saving him from a mad donkey, who was also a stalker. Stalkers are a small organization in Krat that have the goal of fighting off the puppet frenzy and the petrification disease, except that most of them died out. And now we walk through the city on a long road, and we slowly discover everything that happened, after defeating every single boss and killing every single puppet and carcass on our way. And throughout our entire journey, we'll have the ability to either say the truth or lie, and get one step closer to achieving true humanity. Every single lie, or every single non-robotic action, lets us feel some warmth in our hearts. We are constantly tested with important decisions that we have to make to reach the ending. Halfway through our journey, we reach the King of Puppets, who is the leader and the controller of the puppet frenzy. At first the king offers us help, but we refuse it. After a battle, we figure out that the king's true identity was Romeo, and now we kill him. After killing Romeo, our job is not yet done, since we still have to take care of the alchemists and Simon Manus. However, we soon realize that Romeo was not the true villain of the story. Romeo was just a scapegoat created by Geppetto to cover his blame for the puppet frenzy. Romeo, even though he didn't want to become the king, still did, and he did everything to fight off the alchemists and the petrification disease. But why didn't Romeo want to fight us? Well, it's because he knew we were a puppet version of Carlo, Romeo's best friend and Geppetto's true son. We never were Pinocchio. We are just a scapegoat created by Geppetto to revive his son, who died because of the petrification disease. And to revive him, Geppetto needed Ergo. And that is what was special about our heart. Our heart could store it. We were basically Geppetto's killing machine that was created for a greater purpose. However, even after we figured this out, we still continue our journey. And we learned that Sophia, our firekeeper, was only a ghost who tried to lead us to her true body. Sophia's body was being used by Simon Manus, the current leader of the Alchemists, to harvest as much Ergo from her, since Sophia was born with a special condition where she had a connection with Ergo like no one else. We learn about Sophia's true location after Simon's mercenaries captured Geppetto and took him to the Ergo Tower. We go and fight through Manus' elites until we end up finding Sophia, and after giving her the desired piece she was searching for, at the end of the game we find Simon Manus completely broken by his search for godhood that he was able to partly achieve. However, it was not worth it at the end, since we killed him. Now at the bottom of the tower, we confronted Geppetto after using a huge elevator, and now we had two choices. Give up our heart and refuse. If we decide to give up our heart, P will die, and Geppetto will use our hearts to bring Carlo back to life. He will then proceed to murder all of P's friends and replace them with just puppets, as that is exactly what he viewed them as. However, if we refuse to hand over our hearts, we will face the final boss of the game, Pinocchio, the nameless puppet, one of the greatest bosses in gaming. Carlo's deformed body, stitched together by metallic parts. And based on how much we lied in the game, after killing the nameless puppet, we will get one of two endings. If we didn't lie that much throughout this entire game, we just would have killed Geppetto and we would have kept living on our regular life. However, if we lied throughout the entire game and became more and more human, Sophia would have been reborn. And the game ends with a beautiful shot of Sophia holding a P with both of her hands. And wow, I'm just completely shocked. And after beating the game, I was just completely shocked by how well thought this game's lore and story was. It had way more depth than any other non-From Software Souls game, and everything about this story was just so interesting. And one of the best parts of this story was that I was able to understand everything that was happening without needing to read any other lore description or watch any videos on YouTube. However, there is still a lot of lore to be discovered through item descriptions, so the aspect of finding out what's truly happened to the world is still there. And everything from this game's gameplay to its lore was just done completely masterfully. And this is exactly what you get when you give a passionate team like Round8 Studios a AAA budget. And there is a reason this game was such a success. Now, after the success of the base game for Lies of P, the expectations for the next project of Round8 Studios were much higher. However, instead of working on a new game, Round8 Studios knew they could make Lies of P even better. Hence the creation of Lies of P Overture. The devs explained this DLC as the complete version of Lies of P, where they tried to push the game's combat even further and answer all of the story questions that the game left unanswered. Round8 Studios ended up facing even more pressure after revealing that the price of this DLC would be €30. And the question was, did Round8 Studios manage to justify that price tag and deliver with this DLC? And the answer to that question is yes, absolutely. Let's start with this game's expanded combat, that was only achieved thanks to the new weapons introduced in this DLC. The base game already made every single weapon feel unique, with its own moveset and weapon art. However, the DLC went even farther beyond that. Every weapon in this DLC is amazing, and the boss weapons of this DLC are especially extremely fun to use. The death talents are super fast and you can cut through enemies like nothing. The Pale Knight is one of the coolest designs for a weapon I've seen in a long time, and I just absolutely love this weapon's moveset, and I love all of the things I can just pull off with it. And since we're talking about basically boss weapons, I of course can't forget about Monad's Rose Sword, the sword of the legendary Stalker. And yeah, this is basically Virgil's Yamato from Devil May Cry. This weapon is just so fun to use, and its weapon arts are just incredible. The regular weapons in this game also felt incredible, like the Maniac's Pinwheel Blade, which is probably my favorite weapon in this DLC if we're not counting boss weapons. The Silent Evangelist Mace is also a really fun weapon to use, and of course I can't forget about the Royal Hornbow. They made a bow weapon extremely fun to use, and I mean I just absolutely loved it. All of these weapons all try to do something new, and they let you experiment with combos in this game even more than the weapons from the base game. And even some weapons had unique gimmicks. Like the pinwheel, you had to run around to boost the damage of the weapon because the wheels started spinning. And I don't think I need to say anything else about this DLC's weapons, because they are just so amazing. And I can say the same for the areas in this DLC, because they were definitely an upgrade from the base game. And the reason for this is that they were much bigger in sheer size, and they had a lot more secrets. All of the areas in this DLC were really fun to explore, and they all had incredible atmospheres, like the Krat Zoo, the greenhouse interior, the Carnival Garden, Zelator Underground Facility, Monad's Charity House. All of these areas reminded me of some of the best Bloodborne areas. They were just long with great enemy placement and multiple shortcuts that all lead you close to one of the bonfires you found. My favorite area was definitely the Zelator Underground Factory. I absolutely loved the atmosphere of this area and all of the enemy designs. And the two-faced overseer being the boss at the end was just a chef's kiss. When I was going through this area for the first time, I was just absolutely shocked by the amount of shortcuts I found while going through the area. I just started counting all of the doors that opened from the other side, and I was just extremely interested in exploring this area fully. And another area I absolutely loved was the Carnival Garden. The reason for this, even though it wasn't that big of an area, you still just had so much cool shit to do around here, like playing the mini games for rewards and getting things like upgrades, gems, and new weapons. However, even though the weapons and the areas were both great in this DLC, I think we all know that the biggest selling point of any Souls-like DLC are the bosses. And the Overture's bosses did not disappoint. At the end of every area we are greeted with a boss fight. And now the bosses of this DLC are probably the best part of the entire game, including the base game. I've never seen a boss roster of this much quality that the bosses are so good they can be compared with some of the best FromSoft bosses. Let's start with the first boss of the DLC, the Tyrannical Predator. This thing is an ultra aggressive boss that just keeps on spamming attacks, and you just really need to be on point to beat him. He can catch you off guard with his attacks, and he just fits the atmosphere of the first zoo area so well. However, he is a pretty weak boss compared to someone like Marchiona the Puppeteer of Death. This is the second boss of the DLC, and she's just such a unique and fun boss fight. First of all, pairing her attacks is absolutely beautiful, and I loved doing that. And the second of all is that this is one of the best gang fights ever made, because Marchiona controls the arch puppet, and the puppet is only aggressive when Marchiona is controlling her. However, when Marchiona decides to control her puppet, she cannot attack, so the puppet is only aggressive when the strings turn red, so you constantly need to observe who is attacking you. So this boss ends up just being multitasking hell, and I absolutely love it, because it's one of the most balanced and yet fun gang fights ever made. Now the next boss of this DLC is Veronica, a stalker boss just like the ones from the main game, except that she's about 10 times faster and she can really fuck you up with attacks that apply burn damage, and I actually really liked her design. Now the next boss in this DLC is the Two-Faced Overseer. Found in the Yelator underground facility, this boss is a true test of your skill, because you'll need to learn his parry timing. At the start of the fight, it will be pretty easy and you'll be able to read his attacks. However, the first phase of this boss is basically just a small tutorial, because the second he drops below 70% health, his attacks become much faster, and you'll really need to pay close attention to them to parry them all and to dodge all of his grabs. However, once you master him, you can absolutely see why this boss is probably one of my favorites. He's really aggressive and he can punish you really easily. However, he's not impossible, and he's actually a really fair boss fight. It's kind of hard to explain, but you'll just need to fight him to figure it out for yourself. Now the boss after this one is the pre-metamorphic Green Hunter, who is actually an optional boss that you can easily miss, because he wasn't just a weaker version of the fight from the base game. However, he's still really fun to fight, just like the original fight, except that he's just a little bit smaller. I like him because of all of the lore implications, and finding him just feels great. To be honest, I actually really preferred all of the lore implications and the joy when you find this boss fight than actually fighting him. And now the next boss after this one is the Anguished Guardian of Ruins. He is one of my favorite fights in the game, and it's not because of the difficulty or its sheer moveset. No, in fact, the boss is not too hard, because it's a spectacle fight. This boss is one of the best spectacles I've ever seen in a Souls game, and pulling off that last critical hit on him just feels so rewarding. He is a really phenomenal fight, and I just really love fighting him, even though he is a very tanky boss. Now the boss after this one is Lumaccio, the leader of the Bastards. He's one of my favorite bosses in this DLC, even though he's technically just a mini-boss, like the other stalkers in the game, except he has a much more complex moveset with attacks that are hard to read, and his second phase is a thing of beauty when Lumaccio gets corrupted by the petrification disease and he becomes a carcass. His lore is also great, because he was only thinking about himself, and he betrayed everyone else so he can join the side of the alchemists. There's nothing more to say. I love this boss fight, I love his drip, and I love his lore. And I also love that at the end of the boss fight you have a choice to either spare him or kill him with any method you want. And now finally, the final boss of the DLC, one of the best, if not the best boss out of any Souls game, and this is including From Software, and that is of course Arlecchino, the best boss in the game and just a beautiful boss design-wise. This boss has two completely unique phases with extremely fast-paced and punishing attacks, but these attacks aren't incredibly, stupid to dodge or not fun. Learning all of his moves is extremely rewarding, and when you master this fight, you truly are a pro of this game. In this boss fight, you'll need to parry his claw attacks and dodge all of his explosions that he can just throw at you. And probably the best part about this boss is not only his moveset, which is phenomenal, but also his lore. And this brings me to the next section of this video. The story of Lies of P Overture is what really surprised me, because Round8 Studios really found a way to expand this story and the lore of this game in the best way possible, while also answering all of the unanswered questions the main game left unanswered. In this DLC, we go back in time just like we do in the Old Hunters, and we explore the city of Krat before the events of the main game. And our goal is to find Leia, the legendary stalker, the teacher and mentor of both Romeo and Carlo. And Leia's goal is to find the missing Romeo, because Carlo has already been taken by the petrification disease, and she doesn't have much time left until the disease takes her over too. We follow her throughout this entire DLC, and we get cutscenes of her weakened self, and we can see she's doing everything to save her apprentice. Throughout this entire DLC, we can see the results of the alchemist experimenting with Ergo, and we can really see how many lives they've ruined. And this DLC really lets us get a closer connection with Romeo, and the more we learn about him, the sadder the game becomes. However, the alchemists aren't the only problem Leia faces, because Arlecchino, Leia's nightmare and the serial killer who has been terrorizing Krat throughout the entire story, has set his sights on Romeo. And we can truly see Arlecchino's true colors, especially when we see his statue that is made out of all of his victims, and the statue itself is held up together by wax. P does everything and beats all of the bosses to find a broken Leia near the end of this DLC, and we decide to help her find Romeo. After we fight through a couple of enemies, Arlecchino already brutalized him and created a disgusting figure in the process with freakishly long arms. At the end we figure out that this figure isn't Romeo, and we figure out it's just his arms attached to a shirt. However, when we first see this cutscene, it's really disturbing. And I do believe that this figure of Romeo with his cut off arms inspired his very own puppets, which explains why the King of Puppets design also had freakishly long arms. However, Leia freaks out and she tries to kill Arlecchino since she already beat him again, but she can't even touch him at this state because she's broken by the petrification disease. So we help her kill him, and after an intense boss fight and cutscenes of Arlecchino aura farming, Leia finds Romeo and she can use her final moments to look at the sunset together with her apprentice. However, her moment is cut short, because P disappears into nothingness, and Geppetto finds her. Geppetto sees her only as a threat to his plan to revive Carlo, so he uses none other than the nameless puppet to take both her Ergo and her life. Overall, this game's story was incredible. Everything from the characters to the lore of the world, it was just something no other Souls-like was able to achieve. And this is just me talking about the bare bones story. I can go even deeper, talking about the bastards and why Marchiona joined the alchemists, and there are many videos that already explain that much better than I do. In the last 2 years, we have been getting so many Souls-like games that ended up being either disappointing or just really bland. But Lies of P isn't one of these games, because Lies of P showed us that Souls-likes themselves can also be unique and not just blatant copies of Dark Souls, that are just Souls-like games because this genre is currently popular. Round8 Studios from the start knew what game they were making, and with their passion they showed us how much you can actually do with this subgenre. Lies of P is so far ahead of any other Souls-like in terms of sheer quality that the game will probably become an inspiration for other developers who actually want to tackle this genre, that aren't just money hungry. And the reason for that is that Lies of P revolutionized Souls-likes, and I wouldn't be surprised if Round8's future titles get to compete even with the likes of From Software, because I truly believe that this studio is special. Hello again guys, thank you so much for watching today's video, and if you enjoyed it, make sure to leave a like, and if you want to see more of my videos, don't forget to subscribe. Leave a comment whether you agree or disagree with my opinions, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.